Hello and welcome to Film 5D, the show about everything film with the Sony A7S. I'm your host, Aaron Hammock, and this week I revisit my A7S lenses episode with a few new additions. Before I begin, I just wanted to quickly plug my podcast, which I've been posting the video versions of on this very channel, which include visuals, especially the tutorial portions of the pod. However, you can also subscribe to just the audio version on iTunes, and we're looking for any feedback you can give us at this point. Anyway, the first point I wanted to address, as many of the comments on my first episode for the Alpha full-frame E-mount expressed, is that most of the lenses currently available for the A7 line are not 100% designed for video. In fact, this is true for most DSLR and mirrorless camera lenses. For example, here are some of the drawbacks of DSLR or photocentric lenses that hold us back as videographers. Number one, most photo zoom lenses are varifocal, meaning that as you zoom, the focus actually changes. Number two, the zoom control on most photo lenses are not perfectly smooth, they're hand controlled. Number three, the focus throw on most photo lenses is not great. Every bit of movement of the focus ring drastically changes the focus of the lens. This has actually been true since the 5D Mark II took the world of filmmaking by storm 7 years ago. The fact of the matter is, these are still photography cameras that can shoot video. And while with each new camera, it would seem the playing field is kind of leveling out a bit in terms of video features and capabilities, the fact remains that if you go for a DSLR, you are sacrificing certain professional conveniences relegated to the higher end video cameras. However, I think with the advent of mirrorless cameras, like the Sony A7S unlocking the door to use smaller, easier to build lenses, especially with what they call cine lenses, is going to be the next big step for DSLRs or other small form factor / inexpensive cameras. I'm talking specifically about the new Sony full-frame E-mount 28 to 135mm f4 cine lens, which is truly the first of its kind, especially when it comes to the price range. I'll be doing my full review on this lens in a future episode, but for right now, I just want to quickly go over the highlights of what makes this lens a must-have for anybody with an A7S and an Atomos Shogun. Number one, this is a parfocal lens, meaning that you will not lose focus while zooming in. Number two, it has a great focal range when used on full frame, which is 28 to 135mm, covering most of the range you'd use for video. Number three, it has servo-controlled zoom, allowing you to get controlled, precise zooms. There are several other positives and even some negatives that I'll cover in my full review of this lens, but this is essentially a much smaller, much lighter, and much cheaper Cine-zoom lens, unlike anything currently available for the price of $2,500. On my previous A7S lens episode, I received a lot of comments / concerns about the manual focusing system of the new full-frame E-mount lenses, especially the Sony Zeiss ones, being electronic, and I just want to clarify this point. Yes, they are focus by wire, meaning that while your focus pulls may be smoother, which is great for most uses in my opinion, you will not be able to get precise focus hits. For example, in film, you would be using a follow focus, which has places for you to mark where you want your focus puller to land focus. This is obviously impossible if you're using a focus by wire lens. This is the first full-frame E-mount that is not focus by wire, at least not entirely. Though the 28 to 135 is more like a perfect balance of focus by wire and full manual focus. While the focusing does indeed feel assisted and smoother than normal, the ring does indeed have markings and is not infinite unlike the other Sony Zeiss FE lenses. So it's like the best of both worlds. I get smooth focus pulls by hand while also still being able to mark up my follow focus for when I have staged marks for subjects. Now I want to take a moment to compare this Sony zoom lens to some of my other Sony Zeiss lenses at various focal lengths to see if it holds up in quality.
Alright, so here we have the 35mm prime versus my new 28 to 135 at 35mm. And if we zoom here about 400% at the center, we see that they're pretty even actually, surprisingly. I don't really see too much difference here. If we look at the corner, I start to see, I don't know, these are pretty close. I'm gonna call this one a draw. I guess an argument can be made for the prime a little bit, but I don't know, they're pretty even. Let's move on over to the 55. So this is the 55mm prime, which is my sharpest lens. So we should see a huge difference here. Zoom in about 400%. And yeah, I don't know. It's once again, that looks kind of close to me. I was expecting it to be much sharper here. These are all the same settings. So should definitely be seeing a huge difference here. Let's check out the corner. Definitely. Okay, I can see a difference in the corner now. Obviously, these are Zeiss coated primes, so they're going to have a little bit of that pop that I talked about on my podcast last week. But okay, so I could definitely see a difference here. Let's move over to the 24-70 versus the 28-135. Let's take a look at it at 20. Let's look at it at 70 in the middle, and yeah, in terms of sharpness, these look pretty identical. I would say that the 28-135 is even doing a better job here. Yeah, and let's look at the corner. Okay, so the corner, man, I'm gonna get this one to the 24-70. It's definitely a little sharper on the corners, so that's so weird that it's losing in the middle but winning on the edge. But once again, it's got some of that Zeiss sharpness there going on. So there you go.
So I guess what it comes down to is I'll be keeping my primes for photography only, using this lens exclusively for video, and selling off my 24-70 and trading it in for either a 16-35mm Zeiss to cover some of the wider angles, or a 70-200 for some more photography. And besides, I have an RX100 Mark III, which has an equivalent focal range of 24-70mm, if I ever need that for photography. To be honest, I was a bit down on the 24-70, especially considering there was a $1,200 lens. My initial reaction was I really do miss my Canon 24-105, which is honestly hard for me to admit. Though before I go, I wanted to quickly cover some of the potential negatives of the 28-135 Cine-zoom that some of you might encounter. Number one, it has a ridiculously large front filter, 95mm, so be prepared to either shell out a lot of cash for some filters or make the transition to matte box like I'm going to. Number two, this lens is very heavy and not really feasible to use handheld, especially when you add a Shogun. Number three, it's only f4, so you will need to invest in some primes to get more shallow depth of field. However, like I've mentioned before, this isn't the biggest negative for me personally because it keeps the size down a bit, and with the A7S and its crazy high ISO, I almost never go below f5.6, which is pretty much where the lenses are all kind of sharp. But that's it for this episode. Be sure to check in next week for our podcast episode 3 and all the crazy shenanigans that are happening over there. If you have any questions, send them to me on Twitter at Filmin5D or post them on our Facebook wall at this link here. See you next time for my full review on this lens and possibly a new edition.